Hi, I'm Randall from Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab, providing tips on language learning, culture, and human development. And when I think of this year, the word that comes to mind, I think most often, is disruption. Disruption on our daily activities, disruption in our family, disruption in human connection, disruption in our economic systems, disruption in our educational systems as well. Certainly, this has been a really interesting year that has deeply impacted billions of people around the earth. But the second word that I think that comes to my mind is the idea of innovation, in the sense that, well, we have to, in many ways, recast the way that we thought about life in many different and creative ways. It kind of like bursting out of old paradigms of doing things. And this is especially true for education and what we're doing today. Well, in this broadcast, what I'd like to do is interview two very insightful people that deal with this particular issue, talking a little bit about models of online learning, challenges and opportunities. And I have the real privilege of introducing and interviewing Sameh Galil, who is assistant professor and head of language studies department at Arab Open University. And he's going to be talking about establishing and expanding opportunities for online learning. And it's so important in this topic that we're discussing that we bring on the voice of students as well. I think this is very critical to our discussion. And we will be bringing on his son, Ahmed, who will be talking a little bit about his experiences, the challenges and opportunities of online learning. And I think that they have a unique story. Being from Egypt, now living in Saudi Arabia, I'm sure you're going to enjoy this presentation today. So let's go ahead right now, bring on Sameh to the program today. So welcome, Sameh, to our broadcast. Appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Randall. It's a dream come true. We've been following you for years and years, and now we're here talking to you face to face. Obviously, I mean it's not it's not quite face to face. We have thousands of miles separating us, but your heart and your spirit is coming through very. You're such a decent and nice guy. I mean, this has always been my impression about you since perhaps day one. Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
Great. And again, we'll be bringing on your son, Ahmed, a little bit later in the broadcast to hear his perspectives. Let's just kind of see who is joining us so far. We have a number of people that are joining us from Ube is joining us from the Philippines. Welcome. Again, and someone else from Egypt. Jihin from Tunisia, greetings from Israel, welcome. And again, we have a number of people from Saudi Arabia. Dadi is joining us from Colombia, Shaju from Riyadh, well, Nayeli from Mexico. Wow, we just have a lot of different people. And so we want to welcome all of you in joining in the broadcast. And certainly what we want to do is bring everyone into the conversation as much as possible throughout the broadcast. So let's just go ahead, if we can, just highlight a little bit of what we're going to be talking about, Sameh, a little bit today. We're going to be talking about models of online learning, challenges and opportunities. We're going to have you introduce yourself, a little bit about your family and the two countries, Egypt and Saudi Arabia. We'll also talk a little bit about how you became an English teacher, a little bit about the education system there and at the Arab Open University. We'll be talking about that as well. And then we'll talk more about the tools and methods to facilitate language learning. And Sameh, as we've been talking, we want to make sure that anything that we share today is relevant to the degree that we can for situations around the world. We'll talk about the impact of COVID on teaching and learning. And then we're going to bring in Ahmed into the conversation a little bit about parent, student, and teacher response to online learning. We'll talk about the gains and losses, again, during this difficult time. And we'll talk about the future of education, whether it'll be face-to-face, online, in hybrid learning. And again, throughout the broadcast, we're looking forward for people to be able to share their experiences on this particular topic. So let's just go ahead and begin, if you could. Let's just briefly talk a little bit about your family and a little bit about your countries.
Okay, as you can see, this is my small family. Of course, you can recognize my wife, my lovely wife, is on the far right, and me on the far left, and in the middle you have Yasmin, who is 13 years old, and our lovely, our youngest daughter, Tasneem. We also have Ahmed, who is 19 years old, and you have met him, and we're going to meet him tonight again.
Great.
This is basically it.
Great. Well, thank you. And so let's just talk a little bit about your background from Egypt to Saudi Arabia. Let's talk first about Egypt and then the transition to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, well, typically, of course, Egypt is all over the place. No, I mean, nobody, I assume, wouldn't have some knowledge about Egypt. Egypt is obviously the cradle of civilization. It's the land of the ancient Egyptians, and of course, everybody knows about that. Modern Egypt is not much different in terms of the dealing with technology, and in terms of the life. I wouldn't say that life hasn't changed. Of course, it has changed over the years, but we're seeing nowadays development in all the aspects of life. And being away from Egypt for quite some time, I have been hearing very positive testimonials about the kind of development that we were having back there. I'm hopeful that at one point I would go back there and be part of this development process. This is basically
great. So let's talk a little bit about the transition.
The reason why I'm not saying much about Egypt, because lots of people knew already about Egypt.
Okay. Let's talk about your transition then to Saudi
Arabia. Yes, I made the transition to Saudi Arabia perhaps in 2004. It's a long journey. It's such a beautiful experience. People here are very warm and very accommodating. I don't feel that I'm away from home. This is perhaps home to me. As much as I love Egypt, I also love Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, I've been perhaps also an observer of the development that the kingdom has been seeing over the past 14 or 15 years in terms of education. This is perhaps because I work in the field of education, and I see firsthand what is happening, the scholarships that Saudis are given to travel and have their masters and PhDs, and they come back and join their fellow countrymen, and effecting the changes that everybody hopes to see. Saudi Arabia, of course, is home to the two holiest cities in the Muslim world. We're talking about the holy city of Mecca, of course, and the holy city of Medina. Again, if I talk about development, I would need perhaps hours and hours to speak about just that.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's always nice to be able to hear about people's backgrounds, the countries, the developments, and the contrasts. And you mentioned about the contrasts, both that what you see in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia as well. So thank you very much. Well, let's just go ahead and get into the broadcast. Often I ask this question: how did you become an English teacher? Many people approach the profession in different ways. What is your story?
I think my story is not very typical. I mean, it's this passion for the thing that would lead you to perhaps, study and reflect on your doing. And the next thing you know is the thing becomes you, and you become, in other words, it has always been a passion for me. When I reflect back, I would think of how I started. It all started perhaps when I was in my secondary school years, where I caught myself on a number of times explaining stuff to other fellow students. It started there, and then when I moved to college level, I also I kept this habit of explaining stuff to my fellow students back in the university. And it started there and then. I mean, I followed my perhaps my dream of becoming a teacher, and I went into length. I took courses. I watched movies and videos as how I can become a better teacher, and it all started there and then. And then there was this transition or this move to Saudi Arabia, where I was given the opportunity to also work on my skills, and I think I'm happy with with where I am right now in terms of skills, in terms of ways as how you can communicate and deliver the messages that you have to deliver on a daily basis, whether on the level of an administration or on the level of teaching.
Great. Well, thank you for summarizing that experience. Again, everyone has a story. We greatly appreciate you sharing. Let's just see what other comments have coming in. Ahmed, hello, Ahmed from Egypt. Oh, someone from Egypt who's saying hello. Karen from Guatemala. Welcome, Karen. Again, another from Brazil. Again, we have a comment from Israel. Using technology online is demanding. And maybe everyone finds this a different challenge. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. And so again, we're excited to see these different comments coming in. Let's just talk a little bit, if we could begin by talking a little bit about the Open Arab University where you teach. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the structure of the Arab Open University so everyone knows. And again, those that are watching the broadcast, feel free to share your comments, questions for Sameh on the university and how this might be related to you.
Yeah, and the Arab Open University is a pan-Arab university. A pan-Arab university in the sense that we're operating in 8 different countries in the Arab world. We're affiliated to the Open University. We teach their courses, and we get their affiliation and their accreditation. The university was primarily designed and meant to help and reach out to those who cannot afford tuition. I mean, expensive tuition, obviously. We're operating on the principle of access to people regardless of their age, regardless of their color, obviously, regardless of their nationality and their country of origin. Again, like I said, it's 8 different branches, and this is perhaps what is interesting about the university. The fact that you have different backgrounds, you have different student bodies, and they all bring diversity and bring nice experiences to the classroom. In Saudi Arabia, for example, I have people coming from as far as perhaps India. We also have people from Lebanon, from Jordan, from Egypt, and of course from Saudi Arabia. And again, the class, you find the class experience amazing in terms of what those guys are bringing to the class in terms of their own tradition, their own cultures. The way they even process knowledge. In terms of numbers, we're in Saudi Arabia alone. We're having perhaps close to 15,000 students. If we talk about the other, we're totaling perhaps 40,000 across the Arab world. This is basically it.
Okay, let's kind of, for people who are watching, not familiar with Saudi Arabia, and we're talking about pre-COVID. Kind of describe a typical language, an English class. Let's just say listening, speaking, or reading or writing at the Arab Open University. How many students, men, women, textbooks, materials? Just kind of give us a framework so we can imagine what it looked like before COVID-19.
Well, before COVID, I wouldn't say that we were typical. I mean, like other institutions, because our system is what we call blended learning. So we have yeah, kind of this. We have people coming to classes, of course, and we also have, perhaps continue the conversation on our learning management system. In terms of size, you normally have 30 students in class. You have classes outfitted with projectors and, of course, laptops or desktops. You have, you have people dealing with, like I said, part of the conversation is continued on the LMS or the learning management system through the forums, through the university email, for example. So this was before COVID. It was pretty much what other people are offering, with the added advantage of having this flexible blended learning system that we have been embracing since the very beginning.
And that was a good point. You were talking about blended learning. And as I'm showing on the screen right now of some of the online components, this was pre-COVID. It wasn't something that was caused by COVID. Is that correct?
Not really. These are snapshots of classes that I taught during COVID and after. Of course, I wouldn't say after because we're in the middle of the crisis.
Right.
So it's during. It's now. These are snapshots of stuff that I do that I started in April when COVID hit, and we're continuing that now.
Okay. And let's keep this in mind as we start the next section. We're going to be showing several different slides, images of some of the things that you're doing. And what I'd like to do is to talk about some of the tools and methods for facilitating online learning and interaction that could be used no matter where we are in the world. So in other words, as people are watching this broadcast, they may say, and we want them to say, oh, that is a golden nugget that I can take away from this broadcast. So if you could speak for a minute, a little bit about some of the tools and methods that you have used there at the Arab Open University that people around the world could make use of as well. What could you speak to that?
Well, it's like I keep saying, it's not about resources, it's not about applications as much as it is about the tutor or the teacher himself. You will need to have a reflective teacher, somebody who at the end of the day, at the end of a class, who would go and check, make an inventory of the things that he did good and the things that he wasn't very good at. Reflection is very important, like I keep saying. Being up to date in terms of technology, of course, in terms of even the research in the field. When you try to update your knowledge, you need to be on bar with what is happening around you in terms of techniques and styles of teaching. If you, of course, the idea of punctuality, the idea of setting the tone in the class so that people can have a nice, quiet, learning experience. The idea of consistency. You wouldn't ask people to be on time and you don't come on time. You need to also set expectations as how classes or your classes should be conducted, when people should talk and when not to talk. So these are things that you should be all the time thinking of. And if you do them, if you reflect on them and consider them, you are on your way towards being a good teacher. So again, it's not about resources as much as it is about the tutor himself.
And I think I really like that, because you're talking about expectations. These, you could say, are universal principles that could be applied whether you have a lot of technology or not. And I think that's really important to indicate. Let's go ahead and let's see what comments we have coming up in here. We have, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are just mentioning, we just need to be aware of some of the limitations that we have. Learning and growing together, I think, is so important. Let's talk now a little bit about some of the projects that you have been involved in. First of all, let's start with some of these. We'll go through a couple of the projects, and then we'll talk a little bit about the impact that COVID has had on your institution and how that's related to people around the world.
Well, I wouldn't call them projects, because a project would mean that they are unique or something. I'm just following the footsteps of good tutors, role models that we've been following, and you happen to be one of them, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So it's about digging for what works best for the students, and one such project, if you insist on calling them projects, would be the idea of having something specific for writing. I had this, this was way back, perhaps this was 8 or 9 years back in time. I had this project in writing, and I called it the Writing Republic. And I was the reason why I chose the title or the word Republic, because of the reference that I was trying to establish between Plato's Republic and our Writing Republic, in the sense that when you go back to Plato and his Republic, you find him talking about poets and the fact that they received poetry from the muses, and they are very passive. And I took the analogy and I applied it in my writing classes. I said, guys, we're not going to wait for the muses to come so that we can write. We have to, writing is about writing. You need to develop the skills of writing, and you are on your way. You wouldn't need to kind of wait for for revelations and for inspiration so that you can write. And we started this way. We took advantage of the then very famous Yahoo groups. We created a group, and people started, and I would create a prompt. I would send them the prompt on the group, and they would write essays if I required them to write an essay, or a paragraph if this is needed. And then we look at what they have, their input, and we start to criticize and critique what is writing. And I make sure that I also organize their thoughts. I mean, I said, listen, you need to come up with a table where there would be room or place for what I used to call segmental errors, and another section or column for what I call suprasegmental errors. And by segmental errors, I meant the mechanical errors. If you talk about grammar, choice of words, if you talk about punctuation, spelling, and suprasegmental errors would be those rhetorical aspects of the piece of writing. When you talk about coherence, when you talk about unity, when you talk about relevance. And it takes us perhaps a class or two so that we can make sure that people get those ideas right, and then they start critiquing each other. And this was also an exercise in peer reviewing. At the end of the session, or at the end of this 4 months effort, you get to have people who are very sensitive when it comes to errors. They themselves, when they write, they try to steer away from the errors that they used to spot in other people's work. This was a major project that I initiated, and we're doing almost the same thing on the level of the entire university. We are having the digital writing center. I think you have perhaps yes, that's the
Okay.
one. And this is perhaps a pan university effort where all the instructors, of course, those who teach English across the board, are involved. I mean, they have their own, they give their times, and and we tabulated a schedule that would involve and include all the teaching staff. It happens, 5 times a week across the hour, and it's getting the fruit that we're expecting it to get. People are happy about the experience. They feel that the gaps that they have are getting, closed, and hopefully by the end of the semester we can have, people who are, better in writing. Writing happens to be a difficult, of all the other skills, writing, remains or stays the most difficult and the most challenging.
I think so. I think so. And thank you for sharing some of these tasks, these activities, these initiatives, you could say, that you've been deeply involved with. Thank you. Let's talk just briefly. I mean, we could talk about a variety of different activities you're doing. What I'd like to do is I'd like to jump into the impact of COVID on teaching and learning. And then we're going to bring on Ahmed to talk about his experiences from a student's perspective.
Nice. You mean you would like me to
Yeah,
talk?
could you share just briefly, before we bring in Ahmed, could you share a little bit about your experiences? What has been the impact?
The impact is, we were taken by surprise like everybody else. And obviously, perhaps what distinguishes us from everybody else was the fact that our system was already blended. So the migration to online learning was not much of a shock or a surprise for our students, and even for us as tutors. Like I told you, our system has this flexibility where blended learning, where part of the effort is done in class and the other part is done online. Some of the measures that we have taken in order to perhaps live up to the event and the occasion was the fact that we started to fuse classes, and then we our assessment also got different. We had take home exams in order to minimize the amount of interaction between and among students, obviously. But once we got used to it, once the shock is behind us, we started to perhaps go back to our old ways of assessment, where instead of having some summative assessments where you only have 2 or 3 assessments during the semester, we went back to our 5 and 6 quiz assessments, where you're actually after every quiz and after each test, you're checking whether the teacher is doing a good job or not, whether the student is miscomprehending the material that he is getting or not. So we are back on track, if you like.
Okay.
In terms of assessment, we're now doing the formative assessment that we used to do before COVID. The only difference between now and before COVID was or is the fact that we're still doing stuff online.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges, as you mentioned, your institution has been implementing over a long period of time a blended learning model, so that they were perhaps more prepared to adjust and to adapt. One of the words I used last week was chameleonic, and that's that people are able to adapt to their new environment. But I think there are a lot of teachers around the world that have struggled a lot more than you have, perhaps, at your institution. And we hear some comments coming in from Sonia. Hello from Tunisia. Shaju said writing center. I'm not sure. Is that maybe that's someone you?
Yeah. This is by the way, Dr. Shaju or Professor Shaju happens to be my dean. He is
Oh,
my
okay.
boss.
Well, great. Well, welcome, Shaju, for
Yeah, he's
joining.
referring to. I spoke about my writing republic, and I also spoke about the writing, the digital writing center
Okay.
that we're having across the board.
Okay. Well, and again, thank you for pointing that out. And Yasmin says, wonderful work, Sameh. So it's great to see those comments coming in. Well, what I'd like to do right now, I'd like to go ahead and bring into the stream your son, Ahmed. We're going to be talking, Sameh, we're going to come back to you in a few minutes. We're going to talk a little bit about the student reaction to online learning and so forth. Then, Sameh, we're going to bring you back in to talk a little bit about the gains and losses and the future of what we anticipate. So hang on there. We'll bring you back in a few minutes. All right. Well, welcome, Ahmed.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Show today, our broadcast. If you could just briefly introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll get into this question about student responses and so forth.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Ahmed. I'm currently studying in the Arab Open University. I'm 19 years old. I'm studying IT, so that's information technology with a focus on networking. So I've been hit by COVID pretty hard because this is my first semester in college. So I do have a few things to say about the whole thing. Should be fun.
Well, let's get right into that. Your dad was talking just a little bit about some of his experiences from a teacher, from the perspective of developing programs and so forth. But we also, as I mentioned, I think we really need to bring in the voices of students like yourself, of your responses, and keeping in mind that people who are watching this broadcast are from around the world. And we want to make sure that we hear their voices and their experiences as well. So if you could just tell a little bit, starting back even before you started the university, the impact, what you were doing before, and from your perspective, what has been the reaction of parents and students, specifically student, to this new online, completely online or partially online environment?
Okay, so in 2019, just before COVID hit, I was basically just your normal average high school kid. I would go to school. I wasn't the best in high school. I had some clashes with a few teachers, but overall it was fun. I would go there. I would understand the subjects for the most part and then come back home. But, I found that the traditional learning style was not the best for me. Sometimes I preferred, online learning, although I hadn't tried it yet. And then COVID hit. So I got my fair dose of online learning. And I realized that, hey, this might not be as glamorous as I thought it was going to be. It's not completely bad, but at the same time, there's got to be some sort of balance between the two. This is what I noticed. So I definitely think that with online learning and the future of online learning in general, we're going to have to focus a lot more. This is not a temporary thing. Like, online learning is not something that we're just using because of the pandemic, and then when it's over, we're going to throw it away and go back to traditional learning. This is something that's going to change the way our education system works.
And if you can hold that idea, kind of describe a typical language class or class that you have at Arab Open University, so that the audience can say, oh, that's kind of like me, or, oh, that's different than my situation.
Yeah, okay. So in the university, we usually have links that take you to a Microsoft Teams room, where you usually have, depending obviously on the subject, you usually have somewhere from around 20 to 100 plus students in one room. And then you have the professor or doctor, teaching and opening his slides, camera, etc. And students are free to engage in whatever way. But, the fact that, like my dad said, sometimes you got to set the tone as a professor to make sure that not everyone opens their mic at the same time. Not everyone opens their cameras at, sensitive times, stuff like that. So I really believe that professors should set the tone so that classes can go as smoothly as possible, avoiding both technical issues and stuff with, learning and stuff, having to constantly, hey, doctor, can you please explain this, explain that? There should be a dedicated time for questions instead of just everyone opening their mics at the same time or whenever.
Right. And how many students about are in a typical class? What is the range?
I'd say somewhere around from like 50 to 80. That's like the average.
Okay. Cameras on, cameras off?
Well, it depends. Most of them have their cameras off, but we usually do that just to avoid technical difficulties because, as you know, opening multiple streaming videos that just you're asking for trouble with networks. So we usually just we all open our mics when we need to talk during a certain time, but other than that, we try to keep our video cameras off unless we absolutely need to open it for for example, a practical question or something. That's it.
And what do you think is perhaps, as we talk about opportunities and challenges, what would be the, let's say, challenge building human connection with people that you're doing this remotely? What are the challenges? What are some advantages of maybe doing these online classes in this way?
I'd say that one main advantage that I found for me and a lot of people are talking about is the fact that you now have a flexible schedule. Like you're not tied up to, hey, oh, on this day, like I have 2, 3 classes, so I'm gonna have to be at uni all day, and then when I come back home, I'm gonna be too tired to do anything else. Now it's all online, so I can finish my class, and instead of having to commute and go back home, I can just go straight to either working on my assignments or working on my hobbies. For example, I like to record some videos and upload to my YouTube channel, educational things that help people out. So I can go back to doing that. Unlike, if it was traditional learning, I'd have to, say, hey, when I come back, I'll do it. And then when I come back, I'm usually too tired to do something like that. And as for challenges, I think one of the main things that a lot of teachers don't realize is that us millennials, we grew up with technology. So we get distracted a lot by technology. On my desk, I view it as a place to both work and enjoy my time. But enjoying my time is usually a lot longer than work. If I do work or study for around 3, 4 hours, I'll usually, on the weekends, I'll just sit like a whole day, for example, not doing anything. So this sort of creates that difference when you're in an online class and it's 2 hours long and suddenly you can't focus, right? I get easily distracted and I realize, oh my God, I'm scrolling Instagram. I need to stop this. I need to focus on what the professor's actually saying.
And let's bring in a comment here. Shaju says, online learning is convenient and flexible way of learning. Many of our students are working professionals located in different parts of the country. So as you mentioned, maybe some of that flexibility.
Yeah, there's definitely a very flexible aspect to it. I mean, that's why I think that online learning, should, instead of us throwing it away after COVID is done or after quarantine is over in all countries, I believe we can make it better. But on its own, online learning is not the best. I'd say that having a balance of both worlds is ideal for students.
And maybe this is going to some of these gains and losses. We're going to talk a little bit more when we bring back your dad. Let's talk just briefly about what are, let's say, 2 or 3 things you would really like your teachers to know about you and other students in this new completely online environment, or at least a blended environment. What message would you want to share with them in terms of just perhaps having more empathy, understanding about the challenges that you face every day?
Okay, so one thing that actually, a fun fact, this was basically my story throughout high school. I was always the type of kid that would struggle with science subjects. So think of physics, mathematics, chemistry. And the problem with most teachers is that they feel that, hey, my only reason in school is to finish the syllabus, right? This is not how education is supposed to work. Like a student can, excuse me, learn a mathematical equation in half the time that I can. Doesn't make me worse than him. It just means that I need more time. Now,
Right.
a lot of teachers don't recognize that. They say, hey, we're going to complete this chapter today so that tomorrow we can start that one and the one after that, and then etc. So we can finish as early as possible. So what my question to them is, what are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying, are you trying to actually teach students, or are you just trying to finish the syllabus to show to your boss, for example? So
And I
that's
think, yeah, I don't think teachers will readily admit that, but yeah, they have that balance pressure. I got to get things done. Yeah, but yet I want to appear like I'm completely engaged with my students. So that's a great point. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I'd also like to add, especially during this online time, is for teacher not to be the bully. And what I mean by that might sound a little bit harsh at first, but what I mean by that is, contrary to popular belief, some people, whether they're old or young, don't know much about technology, right? Especially people from like poorer countries where they don't have, access to the best technology, etc. So when you ask a student to submit an assignment, for example, and you give him, the span of 12 hours, and he doesn't submit it, you got to understand that it's not all his fault. Sometimes students are excellent when in doing assignments, but they simply can't submit it. Think of things like sending emails, making zip files, writing programming languages or codes in in my major, for example. Having all of these, you need to make separate videos and tutorials on how to actually accomplish this, and not just, say to students, hey, you're supposed to be the one that knows about technology, not me.
And I often hear that, oh, students already know technology, but yet that puts, I think, an unfair burden on them when they do not. And we make simplistic assumptions that they do, and they really don't. Well, that's great, Ahmed. I think that leads into our next part. We're going to bring your dad back on here to actually continue our discussion. And what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to talk with both of you a little bit about the gains and losses in the online learning environment, and then the future of what this might look like, not only in Saudi Arabia, but around the world. And before we do that, actually, I want to look at a couple of comments. Shaju says, talking about maybe one of these gains and losses. However, we miss students in our face-to-face classroom, those lively interactions. What can you speak to that idea of missing students, both from a teacher's perspective, but also from a student perspective as well?
Well, yeah, this is a big loss. I mean, especially if you're perhaps a student teacher like me, and I keep telling people that I'm very emotional when it comes to human and student interaction. I like my students. I like to perhaps fixating them in the eye and gauge their reaction and measure their level of satisfaction. Firsthand. I wouldn't do that with a questionnaire or an exit poll or any of these things. This human interaction thing is really one of the things that people are and people like me at least are not very happy about. Yes, and I know it goes the other way. I mean, I've been hearing students talking about the same thing. I mean, they want their teacher, they want to see them act and react. They want their body language and then the use of hands in order to deliver ideas home. So it goes both ways. We miss our students, and they also miss us.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's
And I'd
good.
like to follow up on that. I think that students in general really miss the whole experience of either high school or college. You as a student have been going for years. You can meet your friends in a setting. You both spend around, depending if you're in high school or college, from 7 hours to 4 hours together. So it really just, the whole experience, you kind of miss it, no matter how much you think, oh my God, I would just love to stay at home all day. But after a couple months, you realize, I actually miss this. I want that balance back. I want to meet my friends. I want to see them. I want to hang out after class, for example. And that goes for teaching too. Like I realized that I'm not the best learner when it comes to online learning. Yes, it's convenient for me, but sometimes I just need that face-to-face class. The emotion and the human contact for me can really make or break a class.
Right. And I think this leads into our last idea about the future of education. Let's take a look at a couple of comments that have come in from Israel. The cost of new technology is surely outrageous and steep, but perhaps we can still find cheaper ones of the same quality. So especially, Ahmed, as you were mentioning a little bit about learning in different environments, Sameh, you were talking about that as well. There are places where, there's a lot of technology and in a high resource environment, but there are places where there are not. Going back, Sameh, you were talking about some guiding principles, no matter what the technology we use. Shanju says, in this pandemic situation, online learning is the best option that we have at our disposal. disposal right now. And perhaps that is true as well. And another comment comes in. Elizar says, totally agree with that. Perhaps some of the comments that have been made. Another comment came in with Afte. How do you see the usefulness of online learning without tutorial meetings with the instructors? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that idea.
Yeah, this is what we've been talking about. I mean, this human element, human engagement that we're missing nowadays. Now that we're away from our physical classes, it has such a negative toll on the whole experience. Perhaps it remains to see whether we're delivering, 100% or not. You cannot really judge an experience unless you're a little bit away from it. We're quite in the middle of the experience. So
Right.
I think some studies have to be done, some research has to be done so that we can measure the damage that has been happening on account of this pandemic.
Great. And maybe that leads into the next final thought. What do you think the future is? Face-to-face, online only, hybrid? Where is this disruption taking us toward greater innovation? Any thoughts on that, Ahmed, from your perspective, first of all? Let's say 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
I definitely think that in the long term, there's going to be some sort of hybrid instruction, because if you think about it, let me talk a little bit about the younger kids, people that are children that are like 7 or 8. They can't stay home 5 days a week. That would be a complete nightmare for parents, as you guys probably know, both of you. So I think the fact that having some sort of hybrid between the two can really manage things for both the city in terms of traffic and for parents as well. Like if they go 2 or 3 days a week and then the other 2 days or 3 days are online, this sort of gives us a healthy balance between the two.
Great. Sameh, any final thoughts on that as well?
I think online learning has come or came to stay. We'll have to adapt ourselves to this new system, and I think it's good news. Unlike other people who believe that online learning is not the best of all possible, ways of teaching and all these kinds of. I think it's even. I take it to the level of saying that it's good for the economy. So why don't we have a mix where people go to the university or to school for 2 days and the other 2 days are for online? And instead of having 5-day scheme where students and our kids are, and they get very exhausted. And why don't we keep it to 4 days, for example? Why don't we keep it 2 days online and the other 2 days for social and human interaction at school, because we need that. Otherwise, our kids are going to develop antisocial, issues and problems.
Yeah.
I keep looking at my city here in Jeddah, for example, when we don't have classes, for example. You normally have, the traffic is light. You move around very smoothly. You don't have those traffic issues and problems. So for the economy, it's good. You're cutting, perhaps on the amount of fuel and all these kinds of things. But I keep saying that online learning is not good. Is not bad news after all.
And Ahmed, I know that recently, perhaps you could share that maybe in the show notes of posting, you created a video a little bit about your experiences over the last 12 years of education. And you talked about the same idea, maybe not having 5 days a week, but maybe a shorter period of time. Is that in a similar way what your dad was talking about?
Yeah, I think it was really similar. Actually, I got the idea at first, and at the time I was in high school, I was like, would that work though? With the workload that they're giving us in school. But I realized, we're in control of education in general. Why don't we fix it so that it fits the schedule of 4 days a week or 3 days a week, for example, with the introduction of online learning? So I definitely believe we can make it work, and it's less stressful for everybody. It's a win-win for everybody, for teachers, for school owners, and obviously for students.
Great. Let's look at a couple of final comments that are coming in. Let me say, Lamia says, I believe that sometimes dealing with online discussions is a good way to encourage shy students to engage during the class in written participation. So finding ways, if you have a larger class, finding means of engaging people, I think is really important.
Yeah.
Here is another one. Yasmin says, I am a student at AOU. I think that learning online is good and effective, especially in light of the spread of corona. But for me and my colleagues, we have a problem, which is the lack of printed books and the university reliance on ebooks only. Could you make one comment, Sameh, to that, about some of the challenges to
Yes.
that part?
Yes. We're doing that. We're having the best interest of our students at heart. The reason why we're not having hard copies anymore is we tried it at one point, and the next thing you know is that some student got infected. So that's why we opted for e-learning material. It's the same books. But they are in a soft copy format. I don't see the reason why people are so romantic about having, physical box.
Well, I know for me, my wife likes Audible, but I like a physical book. So you're right. There are those challenges in trying to balance that out. Certainly, there's not one single solution. Maybe someday I'll go to maybe ebooks, but I understand that feeling, especially when people like to have a physical book in their hand.
Yes.
Shaju says, we conduct regular weekly meetings with tutors to measure the performance of online classes and the challenges that our tutors face and course delivery. So I think that's another thought as well.
I'd also like to add a thing, if you don't mind, Randall.
Yes.
One thing about teachers, I think that's they don't know about students, is that students really like when professors either make videos or record their meetings, because the way I see it is, look, I might not focus the whole 2 hours for whatever reason. Sometimes, I just woke up and just went to class. I'm not feeling particularly well. I had an off day. Things happen, that's what I'm trying to say. Life happens. So the fact that I can have a video explaining the material again, or the fact that I can view the recording without having, or the recorded meeting without having to record it myself over and over every time I go into a class, is honestly, I'd say a lifesaver. Just the fact that I can just access the material again because the professor decided to record it is much better than not having an alternative at all.
Absolutely. And when you said 2 hours, that's 2 hours. That for some people, that's just I can't even pay attention that long to a great TV show. So yes, having that option of being able to record it, I think is really, really key as well. Mohammed from Bangladesh says, greetings. Thanks for arranging such a good webinar. See, well, it's easy when you have great participants and guests.
Thank you.
Another amazing, thank you for the comment. Shaju says, thank you for this great webinar, a good platform to share and exchange ideas. And that's the whole purpose. I'm glad, Sameh, we have you. We are glad that we have Ahmed. Again, that balance of voices, I think, is important. Another one, Ube from the Philippines says, so sad that I have students that can't contact online, maybe can't connect online when we started the class last August. Those who don't have any phone at all. So there are people that I don't even have a phone, maybe not a computer. And that is that loss of human connections. Elizar says, really, physical books are the best. So again, another vote for the best. Shaju says, recordings of lectures are available on our LMLS platform to help students. Do all teachers, from your experience, Ahmed, record their lectures and presentations?
Yeah, for the most part, most students either record their lectures, and if, for any technical difficulties, they can't do that, they just resort to, making a recording of perhaps 30 minutes or an hour explaining the material again. Right. So that's definitely something that's great to have.
Okay. Well, I just want to ask, we've been talking about models of online learning and learning challenges, and I would just want to ask to close out, do you have any final comments, advice, suggestions from a teacher standpoint or from a student standpoint as we wrap up this broadcast?
Well, I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and I would like to talk to my fellow tutors, perhaps, and also talk about the idea that it's not about resources. Again, it's about investing in students, and you can always invest in students by being punctual, by being consistent, by kind of walking the extra mile, if you like. Walking the extra mile would be planning very well for the class, would be making yourself available for your students, and all these kinds of things. This is basically
Great.
what I want to share with my fellow tutors and teachers.
And thank you. And I think walking the extra mile in the snow, in the rain, barefooted, and experiencing those difficult challenges, I think is really important. Thank you, Sameh. And Ahmed, any final thought for students or for teachers trying to understand their situations?
Yeah, I'd definitely just like to add a piece of advice, that I've personally learned the hard way when online learning, especially if you're making the transition from high school to college like I did, is definitely learn to manage your time. This is something that I wasn't very good at in the beginning. And I noticed that if you don't manage your time correctly, especially in an online setting, you'll notice that, 3, 4 weeks have gone by and you have absolutely no idea what's going on. So definitely, learn how to manage your time. This is something that's going to benefit you for the rest of your life, even after college.
Great. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining, for sharing your insights in today's broadcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank you.
Well, once again, I want to thank everyone for joining the broadcast from two insightful people from Egypt working and studying in Saudi Arabia. And I think that's what this world is all about sharing ideas, allowing your voice to be heard. That's one of the purposes that I do these broadcasts. So signing off for now, I just want to wish you a wonderful day